I'd rung times before when I'd have things go wrong with a computer, and then they put me on to a technician who'd say, do this, do that, do this, do that, and it should write it. Turn it off, turn it on again, turn it off, turn it on again, try this, and you sort of think, well, it doesn't really sound as though they're any more technical than I am. I could turn it off and turn it back on again. I felt sick. I felt so sick. And I'm thinking, I haven't got this sort of money. I can't do this. I just haven't got this money, because I know what's going to happen. I'm going to end up being held responsible for this. No, she put the pen in my hand, and the other one was holding the paper from the other side in front of me, saying, you've got to sign it. And I was like this, and they kept saying, you've got to sign it, you've got to sign it. By law, you've got to sign it. And in the end, I just initialed them all. The next day, I rang the Federation of Subpostmasters and asked for help.
That was a bad move, wasn't it? No,
it was, because they said, have you been suspended? And I said, yes. And they went, well, we can't help you. You're no longer a subpostmaster. And again, I was told that I was the only person that had ever had this happen to them. And the actual computer system was completely unfazable. It's you. I'd let my family down. I'd let everyone down. And I was going to go up Cleeville and just stay up there.
Did you have a plan as how you'd kill yourself?
I had some tablets with me.
How far did you get with that?
I was halfway over the hill. I don't think I'd taken a bottle of water. I wasn't going to chill down with alcohol. And then I had a phone call. We approached the lady to buy it in 1998, but we didn't actually move in until March of 99. So that's when I officially took over the post office itself. I didn't get Horizon into my office until 2001/2002.
So you were the first person to use it in your post office then?
We had a day's training at a hotel. Myself and one of my staff had what they called a day's training.
It doesn't sound as though it was a full day then. What was it, limited?
Because, yes, very, very, very limited. We were taught basics on how to sell stamps, how to put a docket through, because we were still doing dockets then. The cards hadn't come into play. It was I think it was about 10 operations that we were actually shown.
Right.
And then at about 3:15, they showed us how to balance, and we went home at 4:00.
Oh. And does it, are you meaning that there were lots of other things that you weren't taught?
There were lots of people crying.
Oh my goodness. Really?
In between. I know of at least 3 subpostmistresses that were in tears because they couldn't get the hang of it. I mean, I thought I'd done pretty well. I thought, oh, this is going to be so easy. This is going to make my life so much easier. Little did I know. But like I say, for the first few years that we used, I would say from when it was put in to about 2004, 2005, other than the fact that we had to keep rebooting the thing because it would freeze, we didn't really have any real problems with it.
So you were balancing most of the time, were you?
Yeah. The only time I didn't balance was when the post office had sent me incorrect error notices for other offices and things like that, which we had, I think, 3 times. We had an error notice for a product that we didn't even sell because we weren't classed as a big enough office to sell it at the time. We did have it later on, but yeah, it was most of the time we were within £5. Most of the time we were within, under £1.
We've heard from Gary that he was advised to use a tin for these situations where balancing was not quite right. You put some money in it if you had a bit too much, and you'd take some money out if you had a little too little. Did you have a tin?
No, I didn't. They had an audit. I had an audit. Actually, the one before all of this came to pass. And we had an audit then, and I'd had 3 error notices for the same thing that was wrong.
Right.
None of which applied to my office. So it left me about £2,500–3,000 over.
But they weren't insisting that that was a problem that couldn't be put right, were they?
No, because it was over. They did the audit, and I was £3,000 over. Well, why are you over? Well, it's because of these 3 error notices that have come through. Then they're not for me. They've sent me the same one 3 times.
Yeah.
As soon as they realise that, they're going to send me that to take it back out, and it will neutralise again. Yeah. She said, well, why haven't you taken it out? I said, well, I have taken it out, just wrapped it in a plastic bag and put overs on it and put it back in the bottom of the safe because it's not my money.
Yeah. So that went really, that was all right, was it?
Taken out because it shouldn't be taken out because those are my errors. So but they were happy with that.
But they accepted that. You didn't have any.
Happy with that.
Yeah. Okay then.
But they didn't say keep the money. They didn't say keep the money because if you're under, we'll have yours.
Well, basically, they said it shouldn't be in there. And I said, well, I'm not taking it out because it's not my money.
Mm. Okay.
That's where it's got to stay.
Yeah.
Because when you correct those error notices, it will go straight back in. Mm. And it won't be anything to do with me because it's nothing to do with me.
So just out of interest then, what happened to that money, Wendy?
Well, they sent 3 error notices to correct what they'd sent me incorrectly.
Right.
Which then made me have to put £3,000
back into the money. Right, yes.
So once that was back there, I was back to normal again.
Yeah, no, I understand that. Okay.
Which is why I wouldn't take it out because I knew.
Yeah.
You could so easily get pulled into, I'm over, I'm £1,000 over, let's go and spend it because it's not supposed to be in there. But what's the point of that? Because you've only got to put it back in again when it comes right.
Of course, yeah. So what was the first thing that happened that kind of alerted you to, I think I need to be a bit careful? It made you really think about your position with the post office?
One of the audits, because I think I had 5 audits in total in the number of years that I was there. And I'd gone, first of all, I'd gone on holiday. My 1 week's holiday that I ever had from the post office while I was working there, never had another day off after that. I went on holiday and another subpostmistress came in and helped. And at the end of her time of looking after my thing for a week, I was £800 down, which I had to put in. Now, I absolutely trusted the postmistress that came in and covered for me. I'd done the same for her. So we didn't charge each other anything for doing it. I went and did hers. She came and did mine while we were on holiday. And we both went through all the paperwork that we had in the office and we couldn't find it. So I was left having to pay, not only for a week's holiday away, having to pay £800 in. I couldn't really do anything about that. It is what it is. I'm sure I've got to put it in.
Yeah. Okay.
Then a few years after that, when we actually got Horizon in, I was around about £1,000 down, and I hadn't done my totals that week, so I didn't realise I was £1,000 down, and they came in and audited me, suspended me on the spot, closed the post office down, went away. I'm trying to find where this money has gone. One of my staff had rung my post office manager on his private phone number, which I know that I had because it was in a drawer in the post office that I normally kept locked. So the only way she could have gotten that number was to have been in my private drawer.
Mm-hmm.
And she rang him and said, am I under any suspicion?
You? Were you under any? Oh, right.
Was she under any suspicion? And he said, no. Anyway, she then disappeared and went to Greece. But they then put me back into position because she'd obviously rang my manager, which was suspect in the first place, and then she disappeared and didn't come back to work. But they still didn't go after her for that £1,000.
They didn't?
No, they came.
And she presumably came back from Greece, so they would have been able to locate her. And
well, you'd think so, but apparently when I signed my contract, I am responsible for any type of negligence,
right,
any type of mistake. Basically, it comes down to anything that post office deems as a loss, I'm responsible.
So in fact, it doesn't matter what she's done because they just make you responsible for it.
Yeah, because they don't have to go to all the trouble of finding her, taking her to court, etc. Because they've got little old me there that's signed on the bottom line that says, right, I'll pay for anything that goes wrong.
Yeah.
And so they said, are you willing to pay the £1,000? And I said, well, it's the only way I can carry on running my business. So my husband got some money out of his pension, and we paid the £1,000 off, and I was reinstated like that. I was taken to Cheltenham main office in the town. I was walked in through the actual office itself, through the counters, through the back, and into a room where they asked me basically what I'd done with it. And I said, look, I know I haven't taken it. I explained to them everything about my manager. I said, he's got to have told you what happened. I said, as far as I'm concerned, I believe that was taken. And that's when they said, well, are you willing to pay, etc.
Were you asked if you wanted to have a lawyer present or anything?
No, I wasn't given that opportunity.
Were you cautioned?
The
evidence, anything you say may be used in evidence against you.
No, I wasn't. Not at that one.
Yeah.
And
no, I wasn't.
They did have a tape recorder and they were recording what you said. And
no,
so it's
not
more of an informal conversation.
Then, it was what they regarded it a chat.
Right.
And I think they just wanted to make themselves believe what my manager had said about member of staff.
Right.
Anyway, they came back. can you write a check for that amount? I said, well, if you don't cash it until tomorrow when my husband's put the money in, we'll be able to pay it. So they agreed to that. I was allowed to go back in and run my office.
So you were only out for a day, as it were, is that right?
It was about 3 days altogether.
3 days, okay.
It was about 3 days altogether. And they just put on the shop door that there was a problem with the computers.
Right.
Rather than anything else, because I think they knew that I hadn't taken anything.
Yeah.
They just wanted me to stump up the £1,000. But anyway, I did that.
Not a very pleasant experience, though, is it? I wouldn't have thought.
No, it's not. It really isn't. And then probably around about 2006, 2007, I had a £4,000 loss from nowhere, which I could not find. I could not, I was, if you'd have driven past my post office at 10 o'clock at night, you'd have seen me in the back going through the paperwork, trying to find out what had happened. Had one of the girls tapped a double nought? I tapped a double nought when I put something in, because it's easy enough to do. But I went through ribbons and ribbons and ribbons of our rolls and still could not find where this 4,000 had come from.
And was it a dead straight 4,000?
No, it was around about 4,017, £18, something like that. Offhand, my brain isn't brilliant for figures anymore. And remembering back sometimes is difficult with the fibromyalgia now. But it wasn't, the girls I'd had there, I'd had from the very start. One of them was a childhood friend. One of them was a friend's daughter at the time. And she was an ex-police officer. So, I didn't think I had any worries in that respect. And they helped trying to look for everything. But I couldn't find that one, and I sure as hell wasn't going to go through all the things of everything. So I maxed 2 credit cards out and paid it off.
Oh my goodness.
Right.
Yeah.
And then I obviously had to keep paying my credit cards off at the same time.
Yeah.
And then in 2007, we had really bad floods in our area, with the deluge from Tewkesbury to Cheltenham all the way round.
Sure.
We couldn't use the post office at the time, so I transferred onto an ambulance truck so I can help the ambulance units get people in, because that's what I used to do. And so for 3 days I was doing that. But when I came back and we opened up again, the screens weren't doing what they should do, to be fair. Every day or every other day, one of us was having to stop trading, because we had a 4-counter office, and one of us would have to stop trading while we rang the helpline and rebooted, because the screen would have frozen. And it got worse from the floods on. And then in May 2008, I had 100 books of stamps appear on my screen, which I knew I didn't have in stock. And I knew I hadn't booked them in because I didn't have them. And I couldn't figure out how they just appeared, because none of the girls would have gone into add stock to put those in, because they didn't do that. I was the only person that put stock in too. And I knew I'd had 10 books in, but this was showing I had a large amount which weren't there. And it came up.
Was that a larger amount than you would normally order, or did you order kind of 100? Like
yeah,
that?
we used to have a special order for a shop that used to sell things at Cheltenham races, And before Cheltenham races in the March of every year, or the February of every year, they would come in and they would order probably 20, 30 books of 100 stamps. And then they would bring me their post in, and I would stamp it for them in between other customers and just chuck it in the bag. But that was gone. We were already past that. So we were back to just having 10 of each book in.
So how many books did you find you had?
I can't remember the exact figure, but it showed up as a £9,000 loss.
Which was a lot, was that?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
£9,000 loss.
£9,000. Well, I knew those stamps shouldn't be there, and I knew my stock should say they weren't there. So I reversed them out.
Now, do you phone the helpline, Wendy? Can I ask you that?
No.
Did you ever phone the helpline?
Every day normally, but I knew when I got a loss or anything like that from other people that they were very good at doubling our losses. So I did not phone. Well, we called it the hell line. We didn't call it the helpline, because every time they asked us to do something, we'd end up worse off than we were before.
So you were between you knew that was happening.
Yeah.
Is that just locally with the local?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We all called it the hell line. None of us called it the helpline.
And if the loss did double, then that again was money you had to pay back to the post office. So the helpline would double your loss, and then you'd have to pay that back.
Yeah. I managed to do that all on my own, because when I took the stamps out, because I knew I hadn't got any, they were fictitious. They were not there. And I don't know how they'd appeared in my stock file anyway. And then I thought, right, okay, let me get the book out. So I got the book out and I went through, right, I need to do this, make sure I hadn't missed anything out on the taking it back out.
So on the book, you mean the manual? Do you get the manual out to check what to do?
Yes.
Or?
Yeah. Well, we used to have a little booklet come through once a week with different things in. And it had a reversal thing in one of them. So I went back to it. I thought, right, just make sure I go through the book this time and I do everything properly, and that should sort that out. So I'd taken that 9,000, those things out, and it gave me a 9,000 thing. So I put them back in again to make sure that I was reversing it out properly. Mm-hmm. So I put it back in, reversed it out, and I had an £18,000 loss.
I bet your heart sank.
Oh, I felt sick. I felt so sick. And I'm thinking, I haven't got this sort of money. I can't do this. I just haven't got this money, because I know what's going to happen. I'm going to end up being held responsible for this. And then I actually went to the loo and was sick, came back, took that out again and thought, right, I still must have done something wrong. I'm going to go through this book one thing by, to the next one and do it absolutely perfectly. So I did that, and all of a sudden I got a £36,000 loss.
Dear.
And by that time, I was just sitting on the floor shaking, because I hadn't got that sort of money. We ploughed so much money into updating the post office, making it secure, making the staff comfortable, doing our house. I hadn't got that money. We were working month to month on my wages that were coming in, and the proceeds of the shop. My husband had just given up work because he'd been diagnosed with COPD. And I thought, I can't worry him with this. I cannot worry him with this. So I did the worst thing ever, as in I said that money was there and I rolled over, because I knew I could not afford to put it in. And then I took out a loan The biggest loan I could get was £10,000. So I paid that off. And every bit of profit I was getting into the shop was going in every time I did a balance or anything. I was making sure that any profit I got went straight in there to pay it off.
So you then got a loan for £10,000 with interest, which you had to repay as well as give the post office. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you weren't telling your husband even then that there was a problem?
No, because in September, he had to go and have some x-rays done, and they found a lot of lesions on his lungs. So at the time, we thought he had cancer, and he was undergoing tests for that. But I mean, luckily it came back. It was damage from the COPD, and it wasn't cancer, but it didn't make his health any better. No, I didn't tell anybody. I didn't tell anybody at all.
So that's a big weight to carry, and you're borrowing money as well, and waiting for somebody to call, as it were, and waiting for an audit to happen.
I'm thinking they've got to see that there's something wrong there, and they've got to see that those stamps appeared there out of whack, if you know what I mean. So at some point, I must have an error notice come back through for that. And then I went from May to October before they audited me. And if you can imagine every day of that amount of time,
you're waiting for the bomb to go off.
To fall, because I did not have the money to put it in. I hadn't taken any money. The computer kept saying, this is what was missing, this is what was missing. I was absolutely certain that the computer couldn't have made a mistake. It had to be me. And then I went through a range of thoughts where I thought, well, perhaps somebody at Chesterfield had got a bit clever and was moving money around.
What do you mean by Chesterfield? Is that Fujitsu or
well,
no?
Chesterfield, I've only ever thought of it as Chesterfield because I didn't realise that the people that were running Horizon was Fujitsu. I thought it was post office and the post office's staff that were doing that. I didn't, at the time, I didn't realise Fujitsu was a separate entity that was doing that. And you know, I'd run times before when I'd have things go wrong with a computer, and then they put me on to a technician who'd say, do this, do that, do this, do that, and it should write it. Turn it off, turn it on again, turn it off, turn it on again, try this, you know, and you sort of think, well, it doesn't really sound as though they're any more technical than I am. I could turn it off and turn it back on again. But I thought perhaps somebody got a bit clever up there, and they were, I don't know, I didn't know that they were taking money out and putting it somewhere else.
Stealing it.
Siphoning it off, you mean?
Yeah, that's what I thought. Because I thought, well, the computers can't be wrong, and I know I haven't got it. So somebody must be siphoning it off.
And just getting a little technical, every week you'd normally balance, wouldn't you?
Yes. Yeah.
So
I was still doing a weekly balance.
Were you able to balance? Because you had 10,000 you could give them, and then you were putting money in when you could, but you weren't getting 36,000. So how are you managing each week? Because it would be a deficit, wouldn't there, every week?
There would. And I was just saying that it was there.
Oh, I see. You're just acknowledging them.
Yeah. Because once you've done it once, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
But doesn't anybody ask you where's the money? I mean, like, are you buying a Rolls Royce or something? Do they, does anybody say how comes there's a deficit?
No, they don't, because they don't really know what you've got other than what you've put onto the screen.
So you could have 20,000 hidden somewhere. I mean, like, you're going to use it for something in your shop
Yeah.
or something. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, basically that's what they thought I'd done, but I didn't. I was driving a 25-year-old Volvo. You know, I hadn't had a holiday for God knows how many years.
I guess what I'm wondering is, why didn't they stop you in week one when you couldn't pay off the 36,000? You only pay off 10,000 of it. Why didn't they stop you then?
Because I told the computer system I had that money there.
But eventually
because I could not pay them it. I realise now, if I'd rung them and said, look, I'm £36,000 down, I don't know why, I would still be here looking at you now. Nothing would have changed.
No, they'd have just swooped earlier.
Yeah, other than I couldn't have been charged with false accounting. Now, I knew that those accounts were wrong, so I refused to sign. I would not sign any of them at the end of the day because I knew that they were wrong. I knew it wasn't my fault, but I didn't know why it was wrong.
Yeah.
When they came into audit, the first thing I said was, can you hold on a minute? I just need to go and speak to my husband. I went through in a bit, well, a heck of a state, actually, because I knew the axe had fallen, and I couldn't sustain it anyway. In some ways, it was a relief.
In
some ways,
it's a long time to wait, isn't it?
Oh, God. I can't even explain how it makes you feel.
Yeah.
I wish I had Nicky's guts.
It takes guts to wait 5 or 6 months like you did.
It does.
I think I'm after watching Nicky's interview with you and realizing what she'd gone through. Well, I wish I had her guts. I really do. But I thought at the time, my husband was that poorly at the time. I thought, well, if I go to jail, he's not going to be here when I come out. I can't leave him whilst he's like this. But anyway, the day they came in, I went through and told my husband, came back through in tears, told them what the loss would be, explained to them about the stamps. They weren't interested in that. They were not interested.
What amount did you tell them to expect to find?
It was just over 26,000, which is what it was. It was 26,200 and some odds.
But at first they thought it was more, didn't they?
They did, because the auditor counted the cash on hand incorrectly, and made it 36,000. And also one of my
interesting slip to lose 10,000 while you're sitting there counting it. That's an odd kind of audit.
Yeah,
process.
Well, it's an odd auditor that can't count a bundle of notes. It's it is what it is.
I don't know. I may be sounding silly if I ask this question, Wendy, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Wouldn't you have thought that the post office should at least have somewhere an indication that the money that you say you have hasn't got back to them? Hasn't got into their bank account so they can themselves balance this money? Or does it not work?
Because I was a busy office and I had a lot of business customers, I had to have quite a large float.
Right.
For money coming in, money going out to different businesses. So in that respect, I could just about hide it.
Really? That's interesting. Okay. But there must come a point where even the post office would realise that there's money not arriving, surely.
A couple of weeks before I was audited, they started sending me letters saying you need to return more cash. You shouldn't have so much cash on hand.
Okay.
So I think that's where the audit actually was.
That's what prompted them to turn up.
Absolutely,
yeah.
Absolutely. But on the day of the audit, she counted the money wrong. We had a gyro that gave us a £9,000 loss because one of my staff had written, it was a payment going in for £10,000, 700 and something from one of the businesses, and she'd read the zero as a 9.
Right.
And she put it in as 9,000. But I knew that was there. I knew it was outstanding, and I was waiting for the error to come back. I made everybody aware of it. And they were aware of that as well. So that wasn't too bad. And then
okay, so they turn up for the audit. What happens? What do they do with you?
They then call a manager in, and a manager came. They found that I hadn't signed any of the counts since the stamps came in May. By that time, I was a quivering wreck.
Which they would have seen. They would have seen that that's how you were.
Absolutely. They just kept saying, "What have you done with it?" I said, "I've told you what happened. It was the stamps. I tried to reverse them out. It kept doubling. I said, that is not real money. It should not be affecting my accounts." Well, you're the only person that this has happened to. It can't possibly be the computer's fault. It's your fault.
You knew, though, that they were lying to you, didn't you?
I didn't know then.
What about the doubling up, though, Wendy? What about the doubling up?
Yes, I'd heard of that happening. I'd heard of that happening in a couple of other places. But I always thought, because I'd heard nothing else about it, that it had been corrected.
Right.
So I said to them, I've just been waiting for the error notice to come through as to why those stamps were on my listing in the first place. And then it was, "You've got to sign these accounts." Well, no, because I knew that they're not right. I do not want to sign them. And they kept saying, "You've got to sign them. You've got to sign them." And then I had a woman either side of me and a bloke behind me. One of them had put a pen in my hand, and the other one was holding the paper in front of me.
No.
And I thought, I'm never going to get out of this.
Physically holding your arm with the pen in it? Physically?
No, she put the pen in my hand, and the other one was holding the paper from the other side in front of me, saying, "You've got to sign it." And I was like this. And they kept saying, "You've got to sign it. You've got to sign it. By law, you've got to sign it." And in the end, I just initialed them all. I didn't sign, I initialed. But at the time, I didn't know that I could put "under duress" next to them. After looking back, if I'd have known that, I could have put UD after it, and that would have read it, because as soon as I signed those paperwork, I was then
responsible.
Yeah, I was then responsible for it. And they closed the post office down that day. They suspended me. They asked me to come to an interview it was the week later at Swindon. They took the keys off the post office and the shop. So they allowed my staff to carry on running the post office. The next day, no, that must have been the third day, because the next day, the 2 auditors came back, because I'd kicked up a fuss about it not being the right amount, and they recounted everything and realised that they had made a mistake and corrected that. So it brought my loss down to 26,000. And at the time, whilst the auditors were in there, I said, right, I want to come in and get all the paperwork out, because I want to have that paperwork available for me to prove that I haven't done anything.
Well, that was good thinking.
So
what did they do? Did they let you have the paperwork?
Yes, they let me have the paperwork.
Right.
I went in, I got some mail sacks, and I put all of my paperwork for the last year into those sacks and brought it out. And I had it in my front room so that I could, not that I hadn't been gone through it 1,000 times.
Yeah. But you had it in your possession and you could look at it. Yeah.
Exactly. The next day I rang the Federation of Subpostmasters and asked for help.
That was a bad move, wasn't it? No,
it was, because they said, have you been suspended? And I said, yes. And they went, well, we can't help you. You're no longer a subpostmaster. So I rang Mark Baker, that I had actually met at another federation because I'd actually got a lot of faith in the federation and had actually become a member and went to a couple of the conferences. And when we'd had some robberies in the area, I went and helped those subpostmasters and talked them through what had happened and tried to relieve some of their stress a little bit. Because having been in the ambulance service, you learn to sort of talk people down from being attacked with a knife and all sorts. So I'd done all that. I thought, great, these people are there. I've been paying my dues for the last God knows how many years, and I got, no, you're no longer a subpostmaster. Anyway, I rang Mark and said to him, right, I've got an interview to go to. I don't want to go on my own. They've told me I can't take a lawyer.
They told you that, did they? You can't take a lawyer? Yeah,
they told me I couldn't take a lawyer. I could bring a friend or somebody else that worked in the post office or worked in a post office, but I wasn't allowed a lawyer. So, sorry.
It's all right.
So I rang Mark Baker, because at the time he still worked for the Federation. He wasn't the CWU then.
Yeah.
And he said, officially, I'm not supposed to do anything, but I'll come.
That was good.
It was. I knew that I'd have somebody there because Mark had always been pretty straightforward and he shoots from the hip, Mark. He doesn't, if he thought for a moment that I'd taken it, he would not have helped me. He's that sort of guy. He shoots from the hip. He is straight. He is. If you're straight with him, he'll be straight with you. So I had to drive to Swindon, to their sorting office there. I met Mark there. By that time, I got the most awful cold. My head was pounding. I was going through, I got a box of tissues with me. I was going through tissues like you wouldn't believe. And we got up there and we were taken into a room. And I said to them, this is all about those stamps. And again, I was told that I was the only person that had ever had this happen to them. And the actual computer system was completely unfazable. It's you. What have you? Anyway, so well, we're going to sit down and we're going to record this. We'll give you a tape. We'll send a tape to your solicitors and we'll keep a tape.
The solicitors you're not allowed to have with you?
Well, I've never had a tape. I've never had the tape. I've never had it. They did send one to my solicitors because they forwarded it on to Threaths. But I've never actually listened back to it. He said, if you're feeling unwell, we can stop this and you can go and get a drink. And I said, I'd like to bring a drink in with me if that's okay. They said that's fine. So they got me a couple of glasses of, plastic cups of water. And then before we started, they said to Mark, we would appreciate if you didn't say anything during this interview. Or no, didn't say that. He said, you're not allowed to say anything during this interview.
Which is a little bit more polite than they were to Gary's representative, which was, you can fucking shut up.
Yeah. And Mark said, if I've got something to say, I will say it.
Good.
And I thought, thank God for that. Anyway, they started taking me through, because I bought the strip of paper with me where the stamps had appeared.
Oh, that was good thinking.
I got all of that with me. And they're saying, well, how did this appear? I said, well, I don't know how it appeared. It just did. Well, you must have put it in, or one of your staff must have put it in. Well, why would I do that when I haven't got them? Anyway, this went on for about an hour. And then they changed tack and they said, what have you done with it? You know, you're trying to make a story up here to cover you taking money.
But you had paperwork. You actually had something you could show them.
They weren't interested in that.
They weren't looking at it.
No, they never even looked at it. They just pushed it back across the table at me. I said, look, I can show you what happened there. Well, we don't know whether you've changed those details. I said, it's printed off. I can't make up a story. I can only tell you what happened. And they said, well, this cannot happen. I said, well, I'm not going to make up a story to make you feel better. This is what happened. And then I started getting really angry and I cried, which made my nose run more. And Mark said, right, I think we need to have a break for a while. So we went out, I went to the loo, cleaned myself up. And I said to Mark, they're not listening to me. He said, no, they're not. And anyway, I went back in and then they said, can we have the details of all your bank accounts to see that you haven't put it in there? I said, you can have the details of anything. You can have all my bank accounts. You can have everything because I've got nothing to hide. Nothing to hide at all. So I got my cards out and gave them my account numbers, etc. Have you got any more accounts? No, I haven't. As soon as I'd given them all my bank details and everything, they went, right, we will go away and investigate this and we will come back to you. Well, I thought, well, that's fair. You're going to go away, you're going to investigate it, you're going to find everything out, and then you're going to be coming back and telling me it's all okay.
Now, did they ask to have a copy of the paperwork that you'd taken, or did they continue to ignore all the paperwork that you'd taken?
They tried to take it, but I took it back. I said, you can have a copy of it. I'm quite happy to copy it for you, but you're not taking the original.
No. But so they were going to, at that point, then look into it. So that was quite a relief, I imagine.
It was a huge relief. Yeah. I came out of there thinking, oh, they're going to investigate it. You know, they'll sort this out. They've got to look through all the computers and stuff. And Mark went, I wouldn't be quite so excited, Wendy. They have to pay to get any information back off Fujitsu. And that's the first time I'd heard the word Fujitsu.
Right.
Other than it coming up on the screen when you first opened up your counter unit. But I thought that's the same as Google coming up on this, you know. He said they have to pay to get any information back, and they're very reluctant to pay for anything. So don't get too excited. And I thought, well, okay, bring me down with a thumb. Anyway, I went home, explained to Doug all that had happened, and then they advised me to get a company in to take on the subpostmastership of the office with my staff in there, and they would pay me £500 a month rental for the post office. So at least I would have some money coming in, because obviously from the minute I was suspended, I had no money coming in from the post office side of things.
Sounds like they were desperate to keep your post office running, which I presume is because it was a big business where you've got all these other.
Yeah, I'd raised that business when I first took it over. It was the pay was like 23,000 a year. When I left, it was 60 plus. So I'd worked really hard to build the business itself. You know, I'd invited businesses in. You know, you come and get your postage from us. We'll put the stamps on and put them in the bag for you. Save all that bother. I mean, it meant you stayed in there for about another hour after everything was finished, stamping it up to go into the things for the morning collection. But it meant I had that income coming in. I'd had awards from the post office, you know, for different things. I'd had awards for catching a fraudster, ringing the police and saying, you know, he's probably going to go to another post office now. You'll be able to catch him. They caught a gang of 3 people. You know, they bought me a whole bunch of flowers for that. And I had certificates and all sorts of stuff. So, and I loved it. I really loved doing my job.
So what happened next, though? Because Mark's brought you down to earth again.
The next, I had a letter saying, could I go to a meeting at?
Okay, but how? What's the timescale between
October to December?
Right. So
and I heard nothing.
Quite a long time waiting.
Yeah. So I was invited to this meeting. So I went along. Mark says he came with me, but I can't actually remember whether he did or not. Because by that time I was heading towards a nervous breakdown. By then. And I'm sure he did. I just
you don't remember it.
I just don't remember. And I got there, and I thought when I got there they would say they'd investigated it and we'd be going back to normal. I really thought that's what I was going for. Because in the letter it was to discuss your contract. So me being naive, I thought they were coming to tell me it was all okay. You know, I could go back to work, start everything over again. Because at this time I got no money coming in. I'm trying to pay off the loan. I'm trying to pay the bills. And it was getting to the stage where I didn't know how I was going to do it anymore. I just didn't know. And then when I got there, it wasn't to say they'd investigated anything at all. It was for them to say they were ceasing my contract. They were sacking me. And he said, do you want to make an appeal against this and stay as a subpostmaster? And I just looked at him and I said, no, I can't even believe what's happening now. I feel as though at the moment I don't want anything else to do with the post office. I said, you're wrecking my life. I did not take anything out of that office that did not belong to me. I did not. I said, that comes down to a stapler right the way up to cash. I said, I have not taken anything out of that office that did not belong to me. And I was I was nonplussed at that time. I thought, not only are they saying this, they haven't investigated it, although they say they did, but they haven't given me any proof that they've investigated. They haven't given me any proof to say what had happened.
There's no
Nothing.
evidence to add to the computer printout that you'd had.
No, nothing at all. So at that point, I thought, I'm going to have to get a solicitor because I can see this going sideways.
Yeah.
So I went and got a solicitor, explained to him what had happened. And then I was lost for about 6 months. I was completely lost.
Now, did they tell you, Wendy, when they sacked you, but did they say, I presume, well, we want our money back? I'm assuming that's the first thing that they would have told you.
Not once did they ask me for the money back at that time.
They didn't?
Not once, no.
So they were contemplating taking you to court then? You got a solicitor because you realised you would probably end up in a criminal court?
Yeah. Yes,
Right.
I did. Yeah. I thought I would be magistrates court. I never dreamed that I'd end up going to Crown Court.
No.
Not that I knew the difference between them then, but... And then I didn't hear anything until 2010.
Which is
Not
how
a
long
word.
after that meeting that you just described?
Year and a half.
Right.
A year and a half.
I never heard a thing. I kept ringing, leaving messages. Has anybody investigated it yet? Have you got any, not that they say that they can find any of the records of my phoning because they say they can't.
So what happened to the post office? Were they running it? Was it still there?
The company was running it with my staff. They had a subpostmistress that came in there and did the balance. They put new computers in.
Right. In your property? This is
in the office.
But it is your property, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they put new computers in.
And who was running the shop then?
I still had my staff there. I still had a couple of ladies that came in and did part-time for me.
Okay, yeah.
And ran the shop. And then I'd managed to get a job with a private ambulance service. And I was working in Birmingham and Bristol 5, 6, 7 days a week to pay our bills and pay our mortgage and pay the loan back. I was on good money, but at the end of the week each week, it had all gone because I was paying bills and interest and goodness knows what. But
you would have also been on edge, I imagine, constantly waiting to see when this criminal action is going to happen. When somebody's going.
I was constantly on edge. I just don't. I don't remember a lot from then, because it was, as I've said to other people, I would go out through the front door, and bing, it was happy Wendy. I've got to work. I've got to look after patients. I've got to do this. I come back through the door, go to bed, and look at the ceiling, and then I wake up, and a few times I find myself pulling all the drawers out, and in my sleep, I'd wake up and all the drawers were pulled out. And Doug said, you were going through all the drawers again last night. He said, I didn't wake you up. I just guided you. And I was looking for it because I didn't know where it was. I hadn't got a clue where it was. And it had gotten to the stage where every moment was like feeling sick and shaking, and And then I'd wake up in the morning and I'd have to drive again to go to where I was working. And I'd have to box it off and put it in the back of my head so that I could work that shift professionally.
I don't know how you did it, Wendy. I mean, you said Nikki's got balls. I think you've got balls.
Were you getting any help?
Not at that time, no.
Just coping with that.
Yeah. And
How long we're talking about 2009, 2010, aren't we?
Yeah.
10 years ago, 10, 11 years ago.
Yeah.
Because it sounds like torture. It actually sounds like torture. That awful thing of waiting for this terrible thing to happen, and they're just not doing anything for months.
Yeah. And then I was at home. I'd had a day off, and it was the day that I received a A4 sized special delivery envelope. And Doug had one too. And I opened it, and it was a Proceeds of Crime Act order. And they'd frozen our ability to sell our house. And they'd also frozen all of Doug's stuff.
So was that before you actually heard that you were going to be charged and you were having to go to court? They did the Proceeds of Crime Act work first of all.
Yeah. And then the week afterwards, I got a letter through from Cheltenham Magistrates Court saying I was due to appear on such and such a day. I can't remember the date.
No, it doesn't matter at all.
And we went there.
So then you had to get a solicitor then for you. Is that you kept that solicitor? Had you?
Yes. Yeah. And then I ended up going to the magistrates court, and my husband's with me, and there's all these people around us, and they're all talking about what they'd nicked and why they'd beaten this person up and why they'd done this, and the most foul-mouthed tirades coming from each other. And I'm looking at Doug and I'm saying, what am I doing here? Why am I here?
Yeah.
Anyway, he wasn't allowed to come into the court, and I went into the court, and they swore me in and asked me whether I was pleading guilty or not guilty. And I said, I'm not guilty. And they said because it was over £25,000 that I'd have to go to Crown Court. So they were going to adjourn this, and then I would have to go to Crown Court. So that was that over. And then the thing for Crown Court came through. And I can't even remember the dates of that now. It's completely, it's just blocked out. I can't even remember it. And my husband couldn't come. He was so upset he couldn't come. And I said to him, it's all right, love, I'm going to Cirencester Court, and there's no cells there. And my barristers told me if there's no cells, they don't intend to send me to jail.
But Cirencester's only a magistrate's court, isn't it? I didn't know there was a Crown Court in Cirencester.
I don't know. All I know was my paperwork said I had to go to Cirencester.
Yeah.
So I went to Cirencester, and I'm stood outside. I've got my mum's there, my dad's there, 2 or 3 of my aunties, some of my customers. My cousins are there, all supporting me. There's lots of other people stood outside the court, a couple of policemen, 3 or 4 other people. Court didn't open. So I rang my barrister and I said, what's happening? The court isn't open. And she said, oh, well, it's been moved to Gloucester Crown Court. You need to be here within half an hour. You'll be held in contempt of court. And I said, how can I be in contempt of court? I've got the letter here saying come to Cirencester. Anyway, it was like an American movie. We were all in a convoy coming back down from Cirencester. My mum wanted to come in the car with me, and I said, I can't have you in the car with me. I've driven. I've got to drive on my own. I can't have you in there as well. I can't do it.
Got to concentrate.
Yeah. And anyway, we drove and we managed to park up. I went to go into the court, and there's TV in my face and reporters and all sorts of people. Why are you late? Why are and all of this? Weren't you going to come? And
you could show them that you'd been told to go to Siren.
Yeah. Anyway, I got there and I went to talk to my barrister, and I didn't realise it was the post office barristers here beside her. And he said, well, she hasn't even bothered to turn up, so we'll have her for everything.
He says that in front of you?
He didn't realise it was me.
Right.
And my dad tapped him on the shoulder and said, she was sent to the wrong court, Mushti. She stood there. And anyway, with that, they said that the judge had given us time for me to calm down and for me to talk to my barrister, etc.
Had you met the barrister before or not?
Yes, I had.
Yeah.
Anyway, we went into a room, and she said they're willing to drop the theft charge and just charge you with false accounting. And I think that's what you should do, because if you go in there now and plead not guilty, you will not win against the post office, and you will go to jail for up to 3 years. Now, that scared the living daylights out of me.
Well, it would.
Because my car was in the car park. I hadn't brought anything with me. I was shaking like a leaf.
Is that the first time that prison had been mentioned to you, or not?
Yeah.
And nobody mentioned the fact that they didn't actually have any evidence of theft, because all they had was this stamp thing on your computer. They didn't have any actual evidence of theft. You didn't have any money. You didn't have any proceeds of crime.
Nobody mentioned that to me. Not even my barrister mentioned that they didn't have anything. She'd employed a forensic accountant for me, and I'd given them all the paperwork that I had, all the original stuff, and I had to go up to Birmingham just before the trial to talk to her about all this paperwork that she had from the post office.
This is the accountant you're talking to? Yeah.
Yeah, they'd sent her all this stuff from the post office that I didn't even recognise. It was nothing like anything that we had in the office itself. It was all code numbers. Some of it was totally illegible. And she said, from working from this, I cannot say to you, or I cannot go into court and say that you haven't taken anything, and I cannot go into court and say you have taken anything, because I cannot make head nor tail of the paperwork that I've got.
But the reality, in fact, is that nobody could go into court and say you had or hadn't taken anything, because there wasn't any evidence of you taking anything.
But I didn't know that.
No, we're not.
We're not. It's not a challenge. It's just I want to make it quite clear that evidence has got to be more than just a computer saying some stamps have appeared in your account.
But I've never had anything to do with a court. I've never had anything to do with solicitors.
No, we're talking about the barristers. We're talking really about the legal help that you didn't get.
They didn't say any of that.
No.
All they said to me was, you need to plead guilty or you will go to jail for 3 years.
It is an extraordinary thing to say to you, because what I'm saying is that just as your barrister could say there's no evidence of you taking anything or not taking anything, nobody else had any evidence of you taking anything or not taking anything.
She wrote out a change of plea thing with the fact that I accepted it was a contractual issue and I was responsible for it. But I did not have that money. I'd never taken that money. As far as I'm concerned, it never existed. And we put all of that down. And then we went back into court and I had to stand there and say guilty. And that really, really, really hurt. And I thought, God, I'm going to go to jail. And I'm stood there crying my eyes. I can hear my mum and dad and my son sobbing in the things above.
Wendy, can I ask you, Wendy, did nobody talk to you in the way that you were talked to at the court, but beforehand? I mean, I would have thought that it would have been a sensible thing to get you in a few days before and talk to you about what the accountants have found and what that might mean or not mean, and what the possibilities of going to the Crown Court might mean, rather than you arriving late at court, you having this kind of situation with the prosecuting barrister being around, hovering around as well.
I had a meeting. I had a meeting at Cirencester Court the day before with that's when the forensic accountant and my barrister said we can't figure anything out from this stuff. We can't figure out anything from this.
I mean, I have to say, Wendy, if they can't figure out anything, then how can the prosecution figure it out? Because, I mean, they've got to prove their case, I thought, and I would have thought they would have to be the people who explain to you and your barrister and your accountant how it is they're going to prove it in the first place.
Because we're saying these things because people who watch this interview need to understand what the court looks for normally when they try and you've got to find somebody guilty of something. You've got to have evidence that they've done something.
And usually
they just frightened me into saying what they wanted me to say.
Yeah.
But that includes your own defense lawyers.
It sounds like, yeah.
Well, I was on legal aid for that.
But that shouldn't make any difference.
They just felt as though they just
wanted to get it over with. Is that really what? I haven't put those words in your mouth. You felt that.
No, that's the feeling that came across. We could go in there, we could be in there for 3 or 4 weeks, we could do this, we could do that, but you're up against the post office.
Well, where's the fighting spirit? I mean, that's the whole point of being a defence lawyer or a prosecution lawyer. Your job is to have the fighting spirit to run a case and try and win.
No, there wasn't any.
Who was your barrister?
Rosie. I can only remember her first name. It was Rosie something.
From where? Do you know which chambers?
She was from Gloucester. I'd have to look that up for you. I'm not 100% sure.
We don't really need to know, but obviously not a superstar of the legal
No, I don't
profession.
think so. No, I mean, like I say, I didn't know anything about lawyers. I didn't know anything about barristers. I didn't know they were different.
No, and I think most people listening to your interview wouldn't know a thing about it and would be just as naive in that situation.
I mean, legal aid, when I when I was doing it, meant you had a good service. It didn't mean that you only had legal aid, therefore you kind of had a poor service and people were trying to rush stuff through. Legal aid, when I did it meant if you wanted to say you were not guilty, that was fine. You were going to have your case and you were going to fight it, and people would look for evidence to support what you were saying, and you would have had your own evidence and have gone into court with your paperwork to show that the stamps, what had happened with the stamps, and you would have been able to put your case. So I
was definitely pushed towards accepting the deal. I was never told of any option to that, or what the option would entail.
Because
it would take
as you
a long
now
time,
know,
and I would go to jail and I would get longer.
Well, I don't know
guilty,
that anybody could. Yeah, but I mean, nobody can say you would definitely go to jail. I mean, Nikki didn't go to jail. Nikki was acquitted after her 3 or 4 week trial, or however long it was. So, you can see that isn't, nobody can absolutely predict an outcome.
I mean, I was just terrified. If I'm absolutely honest, I was absolutely terrified.
But everybody in that situation is.
And the other reality, actually, Wendy, is that Nikki was horribly damaged by the whole experience as well.
Yes.
So the outcome remains very damaging. Nikki's been very ill, just as you have been, and we want to understand some of the after effects on you as well. But having been found, having pleaded guilty and come out of court,
I mean,
the biggest thing for me was when the judge said that he didn't think this was a case of larceny. He believed it was a case of an onerous contract. And he said,
he didn't send you to prison, did he?
No, he said, this is not going to be, what did he call it?
Custodial case?
This won't be a custodial sentence. To which the post office bloke stood up and went to say something, and he just looked at him and said, "Sit down."
Oh, that's good.
He spoke to me then, and he said, "This is an onerous contract, and what it has is put off the evil day of having to settle up for the actual thing." Well, as it was, we'd managed to sell the post office a couple of weeks before the actual court case. So our solicitor had already sent them the money, but they hadn't released any of our funds because we'd actually found a house that we were going to buy and move into. And then on the day, they wouldn't let our solicitor release the funds for us to move into the house.
The post office wouldn't.
Yeah. So we're in a moving van.
With nowhere to live.
With nowhere to go. So we moved in here with my son. Trying to jam all our furniture into the garage, etc. That was a little bit of a trial as well.
You also, we've heard another person who's done this too. You sold your property at a very good price for the purchaser, should we say?
Yeah, it was an extremely good price for the purchaser. To get it sold, to be able to afford £26,000 to give to the post office, we had to sell it for over £100,000 less than it was actually valued at.
And what happened with your purchase? Did you manage to get into the house when? So
no, that's why we're still here.
Did you lose your deposit then on that purchase? Yeah. How much was your deposit money?
Oh, I couldn't tell you at the moment. Our solicitors have got all of that. They've got all the paperwork.
That's usually about 10% of the purchase price, so it's going to be quite high.
It was a lot. It was a lot.
Yeah.
But it was a nightmare. And then when he said that he was going to give me 150 hours of community service. I would be bound over for a year, and I'd have to pay £1,500 costs and pay the post office the money back. And I wasn't supposed to say anything back apparently, but I didn't know that. And I just said, well, we've already paid them that. They've already had that. And he confirmed that with the thing. And he said, this Proceeds of Crime Act should have been lifted as soon as that was paid, but they hadn't done that. So he insisted that was lifted at that moment.
Because the Proceeds of Crime Act had prevented you from being able to
buy the house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so they hadn't lifted it, and they could have done.
But they could have done quite easily. Yeah, they could have lifted it.
As soon as they got the money.
It was 2 weeks before they could have lifted it, but they didn't. And then I was taken off into another room to tell me what I got to do for the 150 hours, where I was expected to go, what I had to do. It's a good job they wrote it all down, because I wouldn't have had a clue when I came out.
What did you have to do?
I worked at Greenwich Abbey in the walled garden, making a path, block path, and planting garlic. And I quite enjoyed that, to be honest. It was nice just to be somewhere. You know, one of the monks came down every time we had a break and sat and chatted to us while we were there. And that was really nice too. I swapped him some cakes for some jam. It was really nice. But we were also, we also I had to do cleaning out a pond at the local village. We painted a women's refuge. We did some painting in a church. And then I think the last 2 to 3 weeks, we were sent to Stroud to work on the canal that was there.
When you say we, who is we?
All the people doing the community service.
The people doing the community service.
Were these the kids that you'd found at the magistrate's court who'd been swearing and threatening each other?
One of them was.
They turn out to be a nightmare or a reasonable person?
He got really upset when he'd stolen 8 tins of beer, and was quite graphic with his language when he realised that he'd got 250 hours for that, and I'd only got 150 hours for
a lot more money.
£26,000. And he was quite graphic about what he thought of that. But I did say to him, I think this is probably the first time I've ever been in front of a court. I think you may have done it a few times. He went,
I think you may be right, Wendy, yeah.
And then we were doing the canal and cleaning up the sides of the canal footpaths and things. That wasn't so nice because people, if you walked under a bridge, because you had an orange jacket on, people spat on you.
An orange jacket because you, what is it called? Community reparation or something on the back of it?
Yeah, community something or other. I can't even remember.
So people would spit on you for that.
That's it, payback, community payback.
Yeah.
And I got spat on 2 or 3 times during that time that we were on the canal, which I didn't enjoy at all, because we were being shouted at and all sorts for a lot of the time. Yeah, for a lot of the time we were there.
I think you lost your job as well, didn't you?
As soon as I became a criminal, the private ambulance company sacked me, because obviously you can't go into people's homes if you have a criminal background, because obviously that it used to be a CBR in those days. It's changed the name now. But if you didn't have a higher one that was completely clear, you couldn't work on the ambulances.
And you enjoyed that, didn't you? It sounded like
I loved it. I used to do a lot of work for St John's Ambulance as a volunteer, even manned their ambulances to back up the NHS. Excuse me.
And the other thing, Wendy, were you already ill by this stage, or was it later that developed?
No, it was just after all of this where I came home and I had an epiphany. My barrister told me under no circumstances was I to try to appeal because it would make my sentence longer if I went back. So I went in the back garden and I put all my paperwork in a big drum and I burned it. And that was quite cathartic at the time. Since then, I realised it would have done better if
not a good idea.
No. But as far as I was concerned, my life was ruined and it's over and there's absolutely nothing I could do about it. And it was then that the mental health really started to take hold. And I went to the doctor and I asked for some assistance and they gave me some tablets. Oh, and I asked for some assistance with that. It didn't really help at the beginning.
This was the antidepressants, was it?
Yeah, and I decided that I'd let my family down. I'd let everyone down. And I was going to go up Cleeville and just stay up there.
Did you have a plan as how you'd kill yourself?
I had some tablets with me.
How far did you get with that?
I was halfway over the hill. I don't think I'd taken a bottle of water. I wasn't going to chew it down with alcohol. And then I had a phone call. And I had a phone call from Alan Bates. And
really? When you were on the hill? When you were on that? Wow.
Yeah, and he said, there's a lot more people out there that have gone through this and are going through this. And I didn't know. I didn't know any of that was out there. And then he said, I've got a lady, if you prefer to talk to her, who's actually been convicted, and you know she'd be quite happy to talk to you. And I said, yes, please. And I just sat down up there, and Joe Hamilton came on the phone, and I think I talked to her for nearly 2 hours. And when I finished the call, I realised I was back at the car.
Right.
And I hadn't taken anything. And I got back in the car and I come and told my husband that other people had been involved in this and other people were in the same way. And there was going to be a meeting and I was going to go to this meeting. And I got there and I got inside that door and there were so many people in there. I thought, well, it can't have happened to all of these people. I mean, it was a village hall and the whole hall was just surrounded with chairs in a big circle. I thought, well, they can't all be subpostmasters. And then when we got in there, the first thing Alan said was, how many of you were told that you were the only one? And 80% of that room put their hand in the air. And then I found out the other 20% were partners or people that had come with them. And literally every single subpostmaster in that room had been told that they were the only one. And it wasn't until then that I realised that the post office were trying to keep us. They realised that subpostmasters are so proud of what they do and so integrated into their community that when something like this happens, oh, my hands are shaking. When something like this happens, you just want to hide because you don't want people to think of you.
No.
people thinking of me as a thief was horrid. It was absolutely awful. And then to realise that they told us that we were all the only one, and we were all kept separate from each other because we hadn't realised that all of us, they literally were trying to segregate us, so we didn't come together and realise that there was a problem with the computers.
Yeah. It's an extraordinary story, isn't it?
At the beginning, I didn't realise we had a problem with the computer. No. I didn't think it could be the computer's fault. In my head, it was somebody at Chesterfield that was clever and was moving money around. Never occurred to me that the computer system was wrong.
That may also be true, though, Wendy.
We don't know, do we?
Who knows?
Well, we don't know. Exactly. We don't know. Yeah. And all the time that the post office keeps on with this constant hiding of facts and destroying of facts, and this mutual protection system that they've got going on, it'll never be right.
No. But you've been ill as well, haven't you? Could you just explain where that's left you?
Well, about 2 or 3 years ago, I started getting quite intensive pain, which I put down to perhaps having arthritis or something like that. But then I realised it couldn't be arthritis, because on a day when I didn't have pain, everything worked fine. If I was stressed, it would get worse. If I was relaxed and unstressed, I could go and exercise, I could go and do whatever I wanted.
And then 2 or 3 years ago, though, what was the source of stress that would affect you then? The case was over.
It was going through last bit of the GLO.
Right.
And wondering whether we'd win the second case.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then obviously finding out that we had won it, and we'd won all that money because they told our solicitors and that they weren't allowed to announce how much money they were giving us as compensation, only to put it all over the front pages themselves. So we all saw it on the front pages before our solicitors and everything could tell us how much we were actually going to get. So you can imagine the anger and the disappointment in that room that was directed at the solicitors and Alan and everybody when it wasn't their fault, was ridiculous. And they shouldn't have, the anger should have been directed at the post office, not at the guys that were trying to get us where we were.
You'd paid the post office quite a lot of money by this stage, hadn't you? You'd paid them
I paid them the £26,000.
And previous to that, you'd paid them 1,000, and then a previous 4,000.
And then the £10,000 loan.
10,000 and then 4,000 before that.
Yeah.
So you were out of pocket by how much do you think paid into the post office?
Probably. Well, it was 26 and some odds, 36 and some odds.
There's another 4,000 somewhere, so
yeah,
you're up to 40,000 at least, aren't you?
Yeah. And then, I forgot my thread. Sorry.
No, I was just trying to tot up how much you'd actually paid or given to the post office, due to the errors in the computer.
Stole from around about £40,000 from me.
Yes.
But
and the compensation that they've offered you so far, does it amount to 40,000?
I've had an interim payment, so that's covered the 40,000. So I'm okay with that. And then obviously I'm lucky enough that I'm not within those 550 other ones. I suppose in one way I'm unlucky that I was convicted, but I'm lucky as much as I've been able to go after them for more compensation, whereas the guys that are left in the 550 haven't been able to do that. And irrespective of whether I get compensation or whatever, all of us will carry on fighting for the rest of those 555.